For the next session, I'd like to invite our panelists to take seats on the dais. To name them is Mohanlumu Kikon, Hemant Singh Katoch, and Major General Vinay Bhatnagar, AVSM VSM. So by the time others join us, we'll start the session, as we got to stick to our timings as well. The other session has to follow in. Let's travel back in time a little. In 1944, the battles of Imphal, Kohima, which were a decisive moment during the Second World War, ultimately propelled the British and Indian troops to victory against the Japanese. Kikon's book, His Majesty's Headhunters, centers around the role of the Naga community, native inhabitants of Kohima, in spearheading the war efforts and driving out the Japanese from northeastern India. Paired along with is Hemant Katoch, who is an independent scholar and consultant. His book is India's Historic Battles, Imphal, Kohima, 1944. This discussion will offer fresh insights into the significance of these battles. The session is moderated by Major General Vinay Bhatnagar, AVSM, VSM. And don't miss on this panel, which will bring to life one of the greatest battles which shaped the course of global history. Will request General Bhatnagar to give his introductory remarks, introductory talk, and I think with the presentation, right? Over to you, General Bhatnagar.
Ladies and gentlemen, General Cardozo sir, General Astana, delegates, very good morning to you. I will just briefly explain the modalities of this panel discussion. I will be giving an introductory talk of 10 minutes in which there is a small presentation on the twin battles of Kohima and Imphal. I have a small presentation of about 7 slides which will bring out some interesting facts about the battle. This will be followed by a 20-minute talk come presentation by Mr. Hemant Katoch, followed by a 20-minute talk by Mr. Kikon, and thereafter we will have a question and answer session. I have 2 questions for both Mr. Kikon, I hope I have, for both Mr. Kikon and Mr. Hemant, and then we will follow it up with any questions from the... I would request the speakers to keep to the timing of 20 minutes each. Hemant Katoch, one of our panelists today, and this is my theme, calls the battles of Kohima and Imphal the twin battles. And I couldn't agree more. Actually, the twin battles of Imphal and Kohima were never counted initially among the great battles of the Second World War. It took a while for historians to gauge for themselves after a period of time and declare that indeed they were among the finest battles fought, and they turned the tide in the Eastern Theatre against the Japanese. During the war itself, the chiefs of staff in London were mystified as to why the fighting in Imphal Kohima theatre was characterized by so many company and platoon actions. What they failed to understand was the paradox of terrain in Manipur and Nagaland. The terrain rapidly absorbs troops. It pulls troops. And it denies the deployment of large formations en masse. You can't deploy divisions en masse. It was in this terrain that a platoon, which was well dug in, could hold back a brigade, and a company, a division. And Hemant Katoch's book, Imphal, Kohima, 1944, has all the examples that we need. Recently, the relatives of Colonel Brown, CO 1 Assam Regiment, visited and retraced the route taken by 1 Assam Regiment as they fought off the Japanese offensive from Jasami to Kohima 60 years ago. This was one battalion that was trained, motivated, and well led. Sorry. I had a privilege, actually, of having served in the Northeast for about 7 years. And as a company commander in Sangshak in 1988, and later as a battalion commander at Chakabama in 1992, of tracing the Japanese 31st Div offensive from Sangshak down to Finch Corner, through Akrul, through Taloi, through Jasami, via Kharasong, Chakabama, and then onto the battlefield of Kohima. As a matter of fact, ahead of Chakabama, further west of Chakabama, there is a forward landing strip, which is a valley where the Japanese commanders landed to see the battle. It's a small strip, not a big strip, but that is the place where the airstrip was. At Sangshak, I also met a Japanese soldier, 1988, who decided to make this village his home. He came back because he had so many fallen soldiers there. And he came back and he settled there in Sangshak after the war. And incidentally, the artillery forward observation officer of 50 Para Brigade was none other than Lieutenant O.P. Malhotra, later our Chief of the Army Staff. And when the order was given for withdrawing, he withdrew and joined Imphal. Now, Slim's appreciation of the situation developing towards Kohima was, and this is his appreciation before the Japanese came, that the Kohima Ridge was definitely a preferable defensive position as compared to Dimapur, as it allowed the concentration of forces without any enemy interference. So he could concentrate his troops without any enemy interference. Of course, it's a different thing that Brigade 158 regiment did cross over and isolate 161 Brigade and also laid a roadblock, which was cleared later. 5 Brigade, British Brigade, and 2nd Armored Div were expected as reinforcements. In the Imphal theatre, the British withdrew through Burma, salvaging all they could. The primary objective of the 15th Army was the capture of Imphal. The 15th and 33rd Division of 15th Army was made to cut off the was headed towards Manipur, while the 3rd Division, the 31st, was made to cut off the Dimapur, Kohima, Imphal road, which they did by isolating 161 Brigade. The way the whole battle fanned out, it was a larger clash in the Eastern Theatre, between Japanese 15th Division and Slim's 14th Division. But they almost seemed independent because geographically they were isolated. So there were twin battles. There was one commander fighting both the battles on both sides. But they were geographically isolated, and the Imphal fellow was fighting for Imphal and the Kohima fellow was fighting for Kohima. But yet they were two. Now some words about the Ganagas on whose soil these battles were fought. Mr. Kokon, our second panelist, has done an amazing research on his book, His Majesty's Headhunters. And he traces the Nagas' heritage from early times up till the siege of Kohima. The Battle of Kohima is often referred to as the Stalingrad of the East. Perhaps it was the last real battle of the British Empire. Lieutenant General Sato, the Japanese division commander of the 31st, is said to have commented that if not for the Nagas, the Allied forces would have been routed in Kohima. It was the Nagas that provided the Allies with intelligence, logistics support, and an enormous amount of labor. They provided labor for carriage of supplies and other things. But they also gave a lot of information because they were the first to see the Japanese coming. Their contribution is well documented in Mr. Kekon's book. The headhunting heritage that Mr. Kekon has so elaborately written about came to the fore, and this is an interesting story. When Yamamo Lotha is a tribe, came into action, he had a dao. When he single-handedly struck off the heads of 87 Japanese who on 13th April 44 had assembled to launch an attack on DC bungalow in Kohima. Actually, he went into their assembly area and he found, it was not that he was counting 1, 2, 3, 4 heads, but after the battle they found that there were 87 heads swayed by this person who walked into their assembly area. So on the battlefields of Imphal and Kohima, the people of the land of Somarai met the da-wielding headhunters of Nagaland. I have 10 minutes. I will now show you a small PowerPoint presentation that highlights some interesting points about this campaign. Slide 1. All right. The map on the left depicts, I'm sorry, you may not be able to read it, but I'll tell you what it depicts. It depicts the battles of both Kohima and Imphal with the various thrust lines of the 31st Division, the 33rd and the 15th Division. And the map in the center depicts the Battle of Kohima. And you can see the 158 Regiment of 31st Division on your right, encircling 161 Brigade and also putting the roadblock at Jorsama. Now the black lines in both the maps, the right map is of Imphal. In both the maps, the dark line depicts the operations of the Japanese. The light grey ones shows the counterattack of 33 Corps and the operations in Kohima. I will leave it at that because Mr. Hemant Katoch has a number of maps to show, but this is an introductory show of the various actions, and it's all in one map. So you can see the whole battle as it went, and there are dates on which these actions took place. Next slide. Now, this is the house in Kangla Fort, which is Slim's cottage. He didn't stay here all the time. Sometimes he went to Kohima, he was touring all over. But it is known as Slim's cottage. And there is a joke if you go and ask people there. He says, evidently Slim slept early. He used to go to sleep at 8 o'clock and directed his guard to not wake him up until there was a Japanese at the door, in which case there was nothing to do. So that was his thing. But Slim commanded the 14th Army and directed operations of both Imphal, 4 Corps, and Kohima, 33 Corps. Thus the two battles came under one commander, reinforcing that they were twin battles. And similarly for the 15th Army of the Japanese, because they also spread on both the Kohima and Imphal fronts. Now I come to the next slide, which is a very important slide, but Katoch will speak more about it. This is Red Hill. Now Red Hill is a hill, and this was the closest that the Japanese ever got to the Imphal. And it was also the turning point of the war. So this is about 16 kilometers it's west of Imphal. Imphal is to the north, about 16 kilometers away. And it gives a very commanding view of the whole area. As a matter of fact, from the top of the hill, you can almost see the complete surrounding area. And the Japanese captured it on 21st of April. And the battle raged for 7 days, from 21st to 29th May. There were various British counterattacks that were launched, but they failed. And in the end, they used armor to actually climb up the hill and then retake the hill on the 29th of May, 1944. This battle was then the turning point of the Japanese offensive in the Imphal sector. Next. This is the Kohima War Cemetery. The DC's bungalow, this photograph on the left, is of the DC and some players, friends who were playing tennis in the tennis court. They never knew 6 years later, this is from 1939, 5 years later, there would be a war raged around this tennis court. So you see the DC on the side and some players, ladies who are enjoying a game of tennis there. Historic picture. And there's more to it because there's a photograph of this cherry tree. It's a very interesting cherry tree. This cherry tree exists in the cemetery. And this cherry tree, because the Allied forces were on a higher ground and the Japanese were on a lower ground, they couldn't fire at the top where these people could fire down. So the Japanese took snipers on the cherry tree and they would shoot there. But every time a sniper went up, they shot him. But I think the Japanese were much like us Gurkhas. They kept sending them till a lot of them fell. And then, of course, in the war, the cherry tree was written off. And then it was rebuilt once the cemetery came up. And I would like to read what the thing says. It says, this flowering cherry tree is of historical importance. The original tree was used as a sniper post by the Japanese and was destroyed in the fighting, which raged around the tennis court and marked the limit. This marked the limit of the Japanese advance into India. The present tree is the 4th generation. So they keep this tree as a memory. And now if you go and visit the Kohima War Cemetery next, this is how the Kohima Ridge was. And you see the comparison now. For example, the DC bungalow, which is the cemetery, is now the cemetery. The DC bungalow, the tennis court area. Then the Garrison Hill is the Raj Bhavan. The cookie picket is the water tank. There's a big water tank that supplies water to Kohima city. And the FSD, the supply depot, is a large indoor badminton court. And JLL, of course, is the police headquarters. And my last slide is a great coincidence which perhaps may be knowledge to you. A rare coincidence. The tide of war changed both in Normandy on 6 June against the Germans and in the east against the Japanese on the same day. The 7th June, early morning, in Zakama, where the starting point was, where 2 armored division under General Grover started, was about the evening of the 6th in Normandy. So that is the great coincidence that happened between Normandy and the Japanese. So the link up finally brought the Japanese to the offensive to an end. And of course, the landings in Normandy ultimately led to the ending of the war. So that is all that I have to say. We'll have a question answer at the end of the 2 speakers after they finish the talk. And I thank you for your patient listening. I'll now invite Hemant Katoch to speak for a while. Hemant. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see everyone here. Thank you very much, Bhatnagar, for that introduction. I think you've already warmed up the audience about the topics we're going to talk about. So thanks very much for that. I'm actually going to focus my talk a bit, of course, on the military history part of Imphal and Kohima. But I've put together a presentation also because I want to give everyone a sense of the visuals of the sites connected to the Second World War that still exist in Northeast India. One that is the core of the book that I recently published on Imphal and Kohima and the battlefields there, and it's supposed to be a battlefield guide of it. But also because while Imphal and Kohima are often called forgotten battles, I think that's been changing over time. More and more people are aware of them. A lot of esteemed members of this audience have read about those battles, but I think what is actually forgotten are the sites connected to those twin battles. I'll start with, actually, it's important to situate geographically Imphal and Kohima. You know, the previous session was talking about Punjab and, of course, sort of the western frontier of India. But actually, what's often overlooked, especially during the time of the Second World War as well, is the eastern frontier of India. Just for your reference, Imphal and Kohima are here. It's important to remember, you know, we look at Imphal and Kohima from Delhi. It's 1,500 kilometers away, 2,000 kilometers away. It's very far. But when you're in Imphal and Kohima, that is the center of their universe. It's Delhi that looks far away. So whenever we're looking at historical events in that region, it's important to center ourselves in that region. So Imphal and Kohima have always, in history, Manipur and that part of, earlier it was part of Assam and the Naga Hills and then Nagaland, has always been impacted by what happened in Burma, what happens in Burma, what happens in parts of China, and of course parts of Thailand. This is relevant to the First Anglo-Burmese War in terms of its connection of these places with Burma. It's relevant to understand the Second World War, but even if you look at present-day conflicts, disturbances, issues, I think to understand what happens in this part of India, you cannot isolate it from what's happening in the region. But let's go back to 1942. This map just shows the Japanese coming up in 1942, and in a span of, I think, 5 months, they captured most of Burma, and which brought them to the eastern frontier of India, on the other side of the Chinzwin River. Why were the Japanese there? It's because at that point of the Second World War, there was the Burma Road, which was a key route of supplies by the Allies, supplying to China under Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist forces who were also battling the Japanese. So the aim was to cut off the Burma Road, which they accomplished in 1942, but it brought them right up to the gates of what we know today as Northeast India. Continuing on, so for the rest of the Second World War until the Japanese offensive, I think this map essentially shows the Japanese in Burma and the Allies in what we know as Northeast India today. The Allies, by the presence of the Japanese, then realized that if an offensive was going to come, it would come from this direction. And they used these interwar years to really focus on developing that area. I want to emphasize it because I think it's the greatest burst of infrastructure creation that this region has probably seen, even until date, is what happened from 1942 to 1944. Airports were built, airfields were built, railways were strengthened, roads were built, and all of that actually is very important to, of course, understand this region even today. So 1942, 43, 44 is when the Allies go about preparing this region for what might come from the direction of Burma. A small point, not always a point, is that the Japanese initially thought that this mountainous region, this hilly region, and heavily forested region would not be conducive to an offensive in the direction of India. But in 1943, there was something called the First Chindit Offensive. 3,000 men sent from Imphal went into Burma, harassed the Japanese lines of communication, and it actually woke up the Japanese to the fact that actually large forces of men could go and cross this border. It set the stage for what was to come in 1944. Alongside the Japanese, there was also the INA. This was by when Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose had taken the helm of the INA. He was also pushing of course, to fulfill the objectives of the INA, which was to approach India and fight the British. So these two plans started to come together in 1943. Just a quick map to show, as what General Bhatnagar has already covered. You've got Kohima on top, Imphal there, and the Japanese forces coming towards them. I'll just quickly move on. Why Imphal? And I think whether you look today as to why the Asian Highway or the Trans-Asian Railway is being planned via Manipur and via Imphal, it's the same logic for why Imphal Valley, the valley in which Imphal sits, or the Manipur Valley, was important then and it's important now. Because if you look at, and this Google map illustrates it very well, if you look at the entire India-Burma border, it's essentially hills, mountains, and forests, but one significant bit of flat land here is the Imphal Valley. It's what made it attractive then in 1944, because if an offensive would go into Burma, it would come in from Imphal, and if an offensive would go into India, it would most likely target Imphal. That is what happened in 1944. The main target of the Japanese was Imphal. They also sent a division, as General Bhatnagar mentioned, to Kohima, because that's where the main road from Imphal, the Imphal Valley to the Brahmaputra Valley, which is Dimapur and beyond, it crosses the mountain range at Kohima, which is why these two locations became the site of this great battle. A colorful map which I designed in 2012 when I was in Imphal, just for you to grasp Imphal. Now, actually, it's not a battle of Imphal, it's a battle for Imphal. Because what happened for about 4 or 5 months is the Japanese approached Imphal from different directions, that's the pink shaded areas, trying to capture Imphal, but they could not. So in fact, Field Marshal Slim has a good analogy. He calls it a hub and spoke a battle, which is Imphal as the hub of a wheel and the different routes leading to Imphal as the different spokes of the wheel. So the best way to understand the Battle of Imphal is the Japanese coming down these different spokes leading to Imphal, but in the end, never actually capturing Imphal. They miscalculated. They thought 3 weeks of supplies would be enough. They remembered the British army that they had defeated in 1942. In the earlier map I showed, which was a fast withdrawal from Burma, they had underestimated that the army had transformed by 1944, that they were not going to be retreating, that they had the Air Force to supply them. So a series of miscalculations, some luck involved as well, led to the Japanese, instead of taking 3 weeks, but actually taking 4 months, strung across long tenure supply lines across some of the most inhospitable border areas and the terrain, compounded with the monsoon season, which eventually spelled a disaster for them. I mentioned this is the last map I'm going to show you, but just to show the first map had showed all those black arrows coming up to Imphal and Kohima. This is what Imphal Kohima led to. The victory of the British Indian Army at Imphal and Kohima led to the springboard for the counter-offensive of the Allied forces, and within a year, Rangoon was taken. This is why Imphal and Kohima is considered one of the great turning point battles of the Second World War. It's where, in this theater of war, the war turned. Before I go to the next slide, also for you to reflect on, at an international level, it's considered one of the greatest turning points. You can see why. It's considered one of the largest defeats for the Japanese in land. The figures are staggering. They say estimates about 30,000 dead, 23,000 injured. So that's at the international level. At the national level, it's where we really, as a country, felt the full brunt of the Second World War, are these battles at Imphal and Kohima. It's also where Indians were on both sides, at the INA and in the British Indian Army. So you had that happening in India. And last but not the least, you know, this map shows points, Imphal, Kohima, these names, but the thing is, these are not just names of places on a map. These are actually the homes of the people and the communities of these very places. So I think the point to really highlight upon Imphal, Kohima is just the staggering impact it had on the people of Manipur and the then Naga hills. I think Mr. Kikon will talk a bit about the Nagas. I'll just mention a couple of points, 2-3 points on Manipur. It was a traumatic experience for the people of Manipur. A part of the country and the world usually sheltered from the worst excesses of warfare at that particular point in time. It was thrust into the front lines of the war. It saw hundreds of thousands of soldiers come in from different parts of the country, different parts of the world. It's people who had not witnessed modern warfare. The second one is a painting from the RKCS Art Gallery in Imphal. Shows people fleeing from an aerial bombardment. So it was really, it's not just traumatic, it was transformative in terms of infrastructure, in terms of exposing the people of Manipur to to really the industrial scale of warfare at the time. So it's, I think, the Manipur before 1942 and the Manipur 1945 had been completely changed. Let me move to more present day stuff. So if this isn't enough, a compelling enough history, what's really interesting when I spend time there is just the sheer number of sites connected to this compelling part of history. So not only is the history compelling, but the landscapes, the battlefields, the reminders of the war across Northeast India are equally compelling and striking. You've got memorials constructed by the Japanese, which is like the India Peace Memorial, the Shangshak War Memorial, some constructed by the Indian Army, some constructed by the British in Kohima. So the memorials scattered everywhere. You've got 5 cemeteries from the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. We've got some colleagues from there here. There are 2 in Imphal. There's, of course, the dramatic one in Kohima. There's in Digboy in Assam and in Guwahati. There's an abandoned Chinese cemetery in Arunachal Pradesh in Jairampur, which is sort of almost lost in the undergrowth. You've got airfields, and I think that's the next time you land at an airfield in Northeast India, I think it's almost certainly been, it owes its genesis to the Second World War. So whether it's Agartala, whether it's Dimapur, whether it's Imphal, a lot of these, and in Dibrugarh, all of them came up actually in the Second World War. You've also got remains of airfields. So this is just outside Imphal, and this is the old abandoned Lido airfield. The whole airfield is intact, actually. If you ever go that far out to Assam, you can actually see it. There are museums. So this is the Aine Museum in Moirang, but you've also got the spectacular Battle of Kohima Museum in Kisama in Nagaland. You've got the India Peace Museum in Imphal, and the latest addition is the Hump Museum in Pasighat in Arunachal, which opened just a few months ago. So there's lots to see. And of course, the core of my book is it traces the different spokes of the Imphal battlefield. It visits Kohima, and it then goes up to Lido and Dibrugarh, where the Lido Road and some of those things can be encountered. But Manipur really, because the fighting happened around Manipur, you've got an array of landscapes that are still untouched from the Second World War. Yes, sorry, this last one, you've got remains of trenches and bunkers. Just something for a minute. What was really interesting and what is fun also is to look at then and now photos of, you look at present day sites compared to photos from the Second World War. Manipur provides tons of opportunities of these. It really makes the history come to life. This is all around Manipur. There are places where you have the old photos from the Imperial War Museum. You can compare them to the present day sites that are still there. So that's just something to actually say that, you know, you can confirm this is where things happened. A bit outside Imphal. I will just add one more, a near match outside Imphal. Of course, he mentioned 22 June 1944. This is where the 2 arms of the British 14th Army met and ended the siege of Imphal and Kohima. I'll end with this. Besides doing research and the theory part of it, one of my proudest achievements is to set up battlefield tours that cover Imphal, Kohima, and the rest of the Northeast. These tours, I did it in 2012 to 2014, but these tours still run. There's an excellent friend and colleague in Manipur who runs them. If you ever find yourself in Imphal or in Kohima, feel free to, it's thebattleofimphal.com. They are just really interesting battlefield tours of Manipur and Nagaland and northeastern Assam. We'd also gone to Myanmar and started Burma tours. Unfortunately, a combination of COVID in 2020, the Myanmar military coup in 2021, and the situation in Manipur means some of these places are not as accessible as we'd like them to be, but hopefully that will change in future. And a final point is, India has a very rich battlefield heritage. We have battlefields from different eras of history. I think this is also an appeal that the more we can do to preserve those battlefields, to create tours that provide learning opportunities for children and also for anyone who's interested in history, I think the more we should do about it. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just rush through my presentation because of, I don't have a slide, so I'll just speak from. So the book, His Majesty's Headhunters, was published last year, and I wanted to write about particularly the colonial history of the Naga Hills, not just the Battle of Kohima, but because in order to understand the Battle of Kohima, I wanted to take readers to the initial interaction or meeting between the British East India Company and the Naga warriors, because in order to understand what transpired in the Battle of Kohima and what was the role of the natives or the Nagas in the Battle of Kohima, you'll have to understand the cultural heritage of the Naga people. Before, the Battle of Kohima, there were a lot of battles every year between the Nagas, among the Nagas themselves, and also between the Nagas and the British army. Starting 1832, when the British first decided to survey the Naga Hills for a shorter route from the Kachar via Dimapur now to Kohima and Imphal, because the other route from Kachar to Jiribam to Tamenglong and Imphal was longer. They met with fierce resistance from the very first survey itself. And prior to the Battle of Kohima, the fiercest battles were fought in Imphal in 1826 with the help of the British-supported Manipur levy, which was formed by the Maharaja Gambhir Singh. So one of the most important treaty is called the Treaty of Yandabo. It's in 1826 was signed, where the British took over the Assam and Manipur kingdom. Assam and also established a political agent in the Manipur kingdom. So that's where it began. We cannot look at the Battle of Kohima in isolation. Therefore, I saw that a lot of times the cultural heritage is ignored, and there are a lot of military historians, both British and Americans, have written about the Battle of Kohima. But barring Himand and Raghu Karnad, the journalist, and a few other scholars, not much has been written by Indian authors on this particular chapter of Indian military history. And I felt that I would like to capture the essence and the spirit in which the Nagas fought in the Battle of Kohima or participated in the Battle of Kohima and why they did. So I look at themes like the headhunting pass. I call His Majesty's headhunters because when in 1832 the British came, the king on the throne of England was William IV, I think, and when the 1944 war happened, there was an emperor in Japan, and also there was a king on the throne of England at that time, so I use the word His Majesty's headhunters. When they came, there was, the situation was that the Naga warriors used to continuously go and heckle the, tea garden workers of the British East India Company. So they thought that we have to go tame this, they called us the savages, Nagas, and they wanted to establish a political administrative headquarters. By starting the survey in 1832, they thought it will be easy because they wanted just to have the road. This road actually that they surveyed is today the Asian Highway 2 and the National Highway 37. So it still exists. The first initiative was to send just surveyors and see what is the possible route. But then they faced fierce resistance. They thought it would be easy, but it took them 46 years to finally establish a political administrative headquarters in Kohima. And in 1857, Kohima was formally established as the political administrative headquarters of the Naga Hills by the British Empire. Now, during the process, they encountered fierce resistance every year. And there were fierce battles between the Naga warriors and the British army. The concept of warfare and is embedded in the culture of the Naga people. And as we study more, it is called the practice of headhunting. So I initially thought that headhunting was practiced in the war and the battles you fought against each other, but it was actually not so. It is embedded in the cultural, practice of the Naga people. For any man to be considered a man in the society, you would actually have to hunt heads. If you don't have a head in your name, you would not be considered a respectable member of the community. So again, the Nagas believe that the spirit of or the soul of a man actually resides in the head. So a decisive victory over an enemy would be not just to kill him, but to cut the head. So that was the tradition. So, and in any battle, till the Second World War, even in the Battle of Kohima, there are so many stories of Naga people avenging the Japanese because they came, they stole the granary, they stole their the livestock, and especially for a Naga, it is criminal when you go and kill their pigs. So it was responded to by various attacks, and there's many stories of how the Nagas actually went and took the Japanese head. So I recount all that, but primarily the essence of our cultural tradition is that in a war you have to take heads. Even when you die, if a very famous or a big chief dies, the heads he has hunted will be buried along with him, because the belief is that in the afterlife, you would be served by those people you have beheaded or that you have conquered. So that was the culture, and I wanted to look at the various moments where the British established their hold over the Naga hills. There is also 3 chapters on how the Manipur levy had an impact on the way Nagas fought wars. Because Nagas fought wars with dhows and spears those days, and the British actually, before George Pooch coined the words phrase weapon of mass destruction, the British one British army officer actually termed the dhow and the spear of the Nagas as the weapon of mass destruction, as recorded in some of the anthropological writings. And I recount all those incidences in the book. But coming back to the Battle of Kohima, not much is written about the assistance provided by the Nagas. In 1942, when the Japanese bombed Burma and took over Burma, so there were a lot of refugees which came back to India, Indians who came back to India because they had to flee Burma. And during that time, they climbed and walked the treacherous mountains and terrains and reached Kohima. So there was the Naga hospital in Kohima where the then Deputy Commissioner Charles Poussey was at the helm of affairs. So he was assisted by the Nagas in actually tending to the tired or wounded refugees who walked so many days and months to reach Kohima in the Naga hospital Kohima, which exists till today. And that experience led to him actually training the Nagas to be part of the what is called as the V force, the volunteer force. So Nagas assisted the British as volunteers, as spies, as scouts and guides, as stretcher bearers, and even some of them joined the Assam Rifles and the Assam Regiment to fight against the British. So that was the experience. So I document some of the stories from the perspective of the native in the book, because a lot of books that I've read, are British accounts, American accounts, and they don't mention, except on in the footnote, the actual contribution of the Nagas in actually ensuring that the British were victorious. The Japanese came, and when they came, they also came with some Indian National Army, INA of Subhash Chandra Bose as guides and also as part of their team. And they also had a deal in Rangoon with the Naga nationalist leader A.Z. Phizo. So, contrary to what the new, what people may think about his participation, the Nagas, although they were wooed by the Japanese in the beginning, actually changed sides and supported the British and the Allied forces. How it happened is discussed in the book. Because of the paucity of time, I won't recount all that. But my book is about two sections of colonial history in the Naga Hills. One is to document and to actually look at the British interaction from 1832 till 1857. And then fast forward to the 3 months. Actually, the fiercest battles were fought for about 2 months and 10 days. It's not 3 months, because the rest, once they took the Aradura spur in Kohima, the Japanese were fleeing, because General Sato disagreed with his superior General Mutakuchi on issues of strategy, and also because of the lack of resources and supplies, and there was the air support could not actually materialize, and that's one of the reasons why he decided that he will disobey. I think he is the only Japanese general who defied the orders of the emperor, and it happened in Kohima. He didn't believe that he should take over Dimapur. There was a point when he could have taken over Dimapur, but over suspicion of General Mutakuchi's intention, they had long-standing rivalry since college, I think, and it went on till the Battle of Kohima. So he didn't actually go down to Dimapur. If he had gone down to Dimapur and taken the Dimapur railway station, things could have been different. But over some strategic differences, he went back, saying that his task was just to cut Kohima and the supply route, which is the supply route of the British, to Imphal. So I end with the story of Yambamo Lotha, as General Bhatnagar has mentioned, who is revered among the Nagas today as one brave soldier who took the highest number of Japanese lives. And although the British didn't honor him according to his exploits, today we also are reviewing, what's the reward of the Nagas participating in the Battle of Kohima in favor of the British and the Allied forces. So some of this discussion will go on. We also talk about Subhash Chandra Bose and his INA, because they came up till Kohima and they camped with General Sato and moved around with the Japanese soldiers. Of course, I don't think they were in the battles in the Kohima, the main battles in the Kohima battlefield. But Nagas have not seen the magnitude of the Battle of Kohima ever in their lives, with such modern weaponry, and when the first aeroplane came to supply the British army, the Nagas thought that it is a big bird and it was a bad omen, so the next day they didn't go to the field. So I recount some of those stories in my book, and I'll be interested in taking questions, if any. Thank you.
We have about 7 odd minutes left. During this period, I'll invite any questions from any spectators on either of the panelists or to me. If there are any questions, yes, General Asana, sir. Mike?
Okay, even without mic, I think my voice can be heard by everyone.
We're bringing the mic. Mic.
Doesn't matter. Firstly, I am from Assam regiment, and whatever has been talked, I think has been docketed. Every name which was called for is a battle honor of Assam regiment. And you mentioned about headhunters. I think one of our battalion is named as headhunters. So that's the context. The Field Marshal Slim, some of the photographs which you showed, today the Commandant Assam Regimental Center's house was also the house of Field Marshal Slim.
Yes.
So that's the kind of connect which we have. Uh, I wanted to ask both the authors, have you seen the Assam Regiment Museum and the accounts which we have with one Assam? Or have you factored that into your books?
I might start. I've been to Jasami and Karasom and seen the sites of those battles and the memorial there, but I haven't been to the museum.
Okay, I would suggest that you have a look at our museum, you will get a different perspective, because we have not only the artifacts, the kind of historical evidences, we also had till quite late, because I have also spent 40 years in Assam Regiment. We had people who had actually participated in all these battles. So there is a fair amount of history which is captured by us and is available in our regimental museums and our books. Even my own regimental history, 60% of it is this only, because bulk of the history is the one Assam regiment, which was a part of the force which you just described. So I thought I'll bring that to context to the information of the viewers. Thank you.
Thank you, General Asthana, sir. As a matter of fact, remnants of one Assam regiment were actually also part of the Battle of Kohima.
Thank you very much for your presentations, gentlemen. Very, very interesting. Hemant has, done a great deal in initiating battlefield tourism, perhaps on a level that's not been done in any other part of the country. Mr. Kikon, you're from that part of the world, and I have seen there are different parts of the world where battlefield tourism actually sustains local economies. Now, Hemant has made a fantastic start. He's created a resource. To what extent, and this is a question addressed to both of you, perhaps first, Hemant, to what, when you started off maybe about 10 odd years ago till now, has there been infrastructure development which helps in creating that ecosystem which would further generate or develop this concept of battlefield tourism? And if you could also, sir, answer that.
See, Hemant has a organization which actually conducts this tour. From my perspective, the experience I've had, the British have the World War II, memorial cemetery, and there are a lot of people who comes from, that region to look at the World War II cemetery. But in terms of tours and walks towards these battlefields, I think Hemant's team has done excellent, and they're doing excellent job. The kind of engagements we've had with both the British High Commission and the Japanese Embassy is quite interesting, because whereas the Naga guides were actually able to locate the entire position of the Japanese Imperial Army and pass on the information to the British Army then, so we were instrumental in their defeat. That's what I believe. But today, if you look at it, British just has the World War II memorial, and they have instituted a trust called Kohima Educational Trust, where they give scholarship to descendants of people who have helped the British Army then. But besides that, the Japanese have been very active. So if you come to Kohima, you will see, I've been on a chopper and looked over Kohima. The two most significant landmarks, besides the good environment and also the cool place, are the Kohima War Cemetery and the Catholic Cathedral. So the cathedral was built by the Japanese. Actually they don't believe in having war cemeteries because they lost the war. So they have recently, the Japanese ambassador came and inaugurated, just a memorial of peace. But on the other hand, they have aggressively started the Japanese language training centers. They have also sponsored the nurses training in the medical college in Kohima. It's reminiscent of the Japanese language classes they conducted when they first came to Kohima for the Battle of Kohima. So, but now on a more professional level, they want to take the young nurses and also young professionals to Japan. So there are a lot of Nagas actually learning Japanese language courses. But they also have actually JICA has funded a major forestry project in Nagaland today. So those are some of the engagements we've had. With the British government, we have those veterans and their pensioners who are writing various memorandums to the British High Commission that their pensions have not been dispersed. And even as we speak, there is another commemoration happening on the 9th, that is tomorrow, in Kohima, where the British High Commissioner is presently there. To have that kind of engagement exists, but on the whole, the Japanese government has come in with investments which, I mean, they also come in not just because the government of Nagaland is helping them trace the graveyards or the remains of their dead soldiers. You know, so many people died, 14,000 in Kohima alone. So they believe that they have to bury at least trace back the bones and bury their dead for the soul to have peace. So that is a massive, I think, undertaking that the Japanese government has initiated.
Just to add to it briefly, to answer your question, I think both state governments definitely recognize, compared to even 10 years ago, the potential of recognizing the significance of what happened there, using it to further relations with Japan and the British, but also, you know, the fact that there are now museums better maintained, the fact that, and some of it is the support infrastructure. There are more hotels, permits are easier for foreigners, so, you know, you can actually come and have a look at these sites. All of them help. But I think maybe one area where there could be a greater push is schools and educational tours that start off looking at these battlefields. And I think the important point there is it shouldn't just be the British and the Japanese historical point of view. It can be at 3 levels. It's the international sort of British-Japanese, the Indians overall sort of INA versus the Indians. And then, of course, at the Nagaland and Manipur level, I think the gaps that are being filled by Mr. Kikon and Yaipaba in Manipur, what is the local significance and impact of these events? If you tackle these 3, I think they'll be fascinating tours for students of all ages and even for adults.
Sir, can I just add on to what has been?
Please.
I think the battlefields today, unlike in Europe and other places, they've been preserved ab initio. Like I mentioned, if you go to Kohima, the battlefield is not a battlefield anymore. Infrastructure has come up about. So unless we try and preserve the original battlefields, somehow reclaim them, and then you give us sense of actuality to the battlefield. The other thing is changing our mindset about historic battles. I think the main thing is educating our people of the importance of battlefield tourism. I think that goes a long way, and this should start from the school onwards. Whether it's a Battle of Panipat or whether it's Haldi Ghati or even where Tipu Sultan was there. So the originality of the place must be preserved and brought back to its natural things so that the battlefield can be explained much better. Just a point, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for a very, very interesting talk on the battles of Kohima and Imphal. I just had 2 interconnected questions. One is that both of you emphasized the possibility that the British could have been beaten at Kohima Imphal, but I remember reading Japanese accounts of the of their planning for the battle, and people like Lieutenant General Sato were saying that this is an unwinnable battle. We can't realistically cross 1,000 kilometers starving and then beat an army that is considerably larger, better equipped, and better prepared than we are. So do you realistically think that there was a possibility that they might have won? And if the Japanese had been able to win, what would have the knock-on effects been at a national level? Would it have started rebellion in India, for instance? Or what do you think the national and international consequences of a Japanese victory at Kohima Imphal might have entailed?
No, it's a very good question. It's one of those what ifs of history. I think it's a matter of timing. I think in the initial weeks of the battle, northern parts of Imphal, parts of Kohima were not very well defended. I mean, they knew the Japanese were coming, but they were expected to come from the south. They never expected an entire division to go towards Kohima and at Imphal from the north. If in those initial few weeks, and as Mr. Kigon, I think General Bhatnagar mentioned, if someone had gone for Dimapur, for example, bypassed Kohima and gone to Dimapur, that would have been a prized asset. Maybe that could have changed things. And if the northern bits of Imphal were taken by the Japanese in those initial few weeks, maybe things could have been different. It's just there were delays by first Assam at Jasami, by the defense of Shangshak, and by the fact that reinforcements were flown in so fast from the Arakan and other places that that window was, of opportunity for the Japanese was lost. What could have happened? So the fact that, at least from my understanding, the fact that it was only about 7,000 men from the INA who were able to come along with about 70 or 80,000 Japanese meant this whole thing of whether the INA breaks through the gates of India, enters sort of the Brahmaputra Valley and beyond, and how that might have galvanized people, perhaps with the Netaji at its helm, none of this was ever tested. Right? It's 7,000 men who were rushed, dependent on the Japanese. It never came to that. The what if is, if they had come in, who knows? Maybe it could have set different things in motion, but honestly, that's in the realm of speculation.
Can I just
answer this? Yeah. Okay, the residual capacity of the Japanese was not beyond what was done. After that, at best, they would have taken Dimapur. Thereafter, they didn't have the residual capacity. I mean, they would have reached their culmination point. Okay.
just another point. You know, you're looking at Kohima and Imphal in isolation. There was the great battle in Pacific, which was island hopping. And you know what happened in August of the next year. So, you know, they had stretched their line of communication so far. Philippines was being overtaken. The island hopping operations were on in Pacific. And therefore, to hold, even if they had reached Dimapur, Tokyo would have collapsed. So that is the, thank you. Gentlemen, I think we have come to the end of this session. Thank you very much for listening to all of us. We are grateful. And we ourselves have been educated by the questions that you put up to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to the panel for a very enriching session. I would request, in fact, we'd just like to present token of appreciation to all three of you. Pick. Just leave it that way.